Nobilis Reed presents AudioThrust.
Welcome to AudioThrust, a podcast of erotic speculative fiction presented by the AudioThrust team, Nobilis Reed, Vivienne Ferrari, and Peter Elfman. In this episode, I'm pleased to present Chapter 1 of Cagefighting Nuns in Tanks. This story came from a Discord conversation where I just threw the title together. A bunch of people said, "I'd read that," and then a plot dropped into my skull, so I wrote it. Everything else you need to know about the story is right there in the title. As a reminder, if you're supporting AudioThrust at the $1 level, or if you are listening to the public feed, this episode will be all you get of Cagefighting Nuns in Tanks. Those of you supporting at $3 or higher can expect to hear more of this story quite soon.
Chapter 1. Sister John ladled potato bacon soup into bowls, while Sister Mary Sebastian and I put on makeshift leather boxing gloves in a corner of the barn. We wore t-shirts and jean shorts with bits of lace showing underneath. Fetish gear the soldiers had looted somewhere. Sister Mary Sebastian's dark skin contrasted with my freckles. Our close-cropped hair lay concealed by the coifs and veils that our captor had insisted we wear. "I expect you to be as obedient as ever," were the last words Sister Mary Sebastian, Sister John, and I had heard from our Mother Superior before we were led away. As obedient as ever. That had been a signal, most definitely, that the trio of the biggest troublemakers in the Sisters of Celestial Endurance were to do whatever we could to end the occupation of our convent. Captain Rackham stood before a makeshift arena, stacked hay bales supporting hurricane fencing set up in a 16-foot octagon and wired together.
"All right, you reprobates, here's how this is going to work. You guys stay in your fucking seats. I don't care how charged up you get, this is not going to be a riot. I will personally shoot anyone that even comes close to that cage. We don't know what kind of mutant clap they got, so none of you are going to be dipping any dipsticks."
It was an insult, but since the big boom, all kinds of viruses and stuff have gotten out of control without any real medical industry to fight it. So Rackham had good reasons to keep his men in line.
"Show me you've got discipline,"
he concluded, raising a fist in the air.
"You got it, sir,"
shouted one man from the back. More cheers backed him up. Their uniforms were worn and patched, but they had behaved themselves so far. Maybe they really were a remnant of a military unit, and not just some randos who had come across a cache of military equipment.
"If you guys can keep a lid on it, you're going to get a show. These two women of the cloth have agreed to give us a little martial arts demonstration."
This line got a laugh.
"And to make it more interesting, after each round, I will declare a loser for that round, and she'll be taking something off."
He smirked.
"Educationally."
Cheers. One of the men shouted,
"Yeah, 'cause Simmons don't know what a naked woman looks like."
I shared a look with Sister Mary Sebastian. We both knew what was at stake. We had to keep these men distracted while the pills we had slipped into their food took effect. That would take at least a half an hour, maybe longer. Longer than any sparring session. The ruses we Sisters of Celestial Endurance had used to distract raiders, the stinking nun habits, the grime we had covered ourselves in, the junk and garbage piled up to make our equipment look disused and worthless, had failed. The invaders were led by a savvy officer who had recognized our convent for what it was, an island of civilization in a savage world where strength was the only virtue. They thought they could steal the convent's resources with impunity, and so far they had been right. It was hard to argue with the most dangerous machines ever to roll onto a battlefield. Rackham's men hadn't arrived on motorcycles and trucks with makeshift armor bolted to them, the way most raiders did. They had arrived in tanks, supported by a dozen heavy military trucks to carry food, fuel, and supplies. There was no question that they had the strength to do whatever they wanted without direct opposition. After draining the fuel from the convent's cache and the food from our stores, Rackham planned to steal something else. Our dignity. The cage had been Rackham's idea. His men had discovered the boxing gloves in the barn the convent used as a gym. Questions were inevitable. I had been able to pass them off as a little hobby a few of the sisters used to work off frustrations. It hadn't been enough. Rackham ordered his men to take down the fencing around the pigs and set it up in the barn. The fencing wouldn't be needed once the pigs were butchered to feed his men. "How do you want to do this?" Sister Mary Sebastian murmured. I replied just as quietly. "We need to make it last. It can't be over too quickly. I'll hold back, let you win some rounds." "Like I couldn't take you if I really wanted to." She smirked at the lie. We both knew who was the better fighter. "You can take me any time," I said with a wink. "But you can't beat me in a fight. Not yet." "Someday." We stood up, climbed through the narrow gap in the fence, and spread out into the cage. Both of us were slim and rangy, bodies wired together with muscle earned with hard work, and slim from a restricted diet. Not exactly the pinnacle of sex appeal. But we were clean now and female, and that was all that mattered to these guys, and the clean part was not terribly important. As we circled in on each other, throwing jabs and combinations to test each other's defenses, the pain began. A smack on the forearm, a blow to the shoulder, a glancing hit on the elbow. Neither of us knew stage fighting. The only convincing punch we knew how to throw would hurt. The gloves made the worst injuries. Ruptured organs, broken bones, less likely. But a sincere punch still hurt. We had sparred many times before. We knew the other's rhythm, our strengths and weaknesses, so it wasn't too hard for me to let my guard slip just enough to let a punch through. We weren't allowed the leather pads we normally wore when sparring, so it hurt more than usual. I staggered back halfway to the fence, and the crowd erupted, cheering and booing and just plain making noise. I redoubled my defenses, making sure that was the only strike that got through, never going in to even things up. When the 2 minutes was up, Rackham rang the bell and we separated. As planned, Rackham declared Sister Mary Sebastian the winner of the first round, and I dutifully stripped off my shirt. Once again, the soldiers cheered. I pretended to be embarrassed, holding the shirt over my chest, but that was for show. Underneath, I had on a black bra made of little more than ribbons crisscrossing my flesh. Taking a minute to complete the reveal was another minute for the pills to take effect. The soup was already gone, slurped down during the fight and the preamble, and the bowls taken away by Sister John. Rackham rang the bell again, and we closed in on each other. I opened with a furious flurry, battering at Sister Mary Sebastian's guard, pushing her back towards one of the corners of the octagon. The soldiers roared. Sister Mary fought back, forcing me to keep my guard up, but I had taken the initiative and I wasn't giving it back. I pressed on, taking a jab to the shoulder, but I got in close and delivered a solid punch right under Sister Mary's boob. One of the soldiers shouted, "Oh shit, they can actually fight!" That wasn't good. The last thing I wanted was to raise their suspicions, but it was too late to go back. Rackham declared me the winner of the second round, and Sister Mary Sebastian took off her shirt. Underneath was a bra made out of red lace. It was too big, but nobody cared. In the next round, both of us came out aggressively, looking for the upper hand. Sister Mary Sebastian thought it would be her turn, but it would be better not to go that way. Explicit turn-taking would be too suspicious. 2 bruising minutes later, Rackham rang the bell and declared me the winner of the round. Under her shorts, Sister Mary Sebastian wore a white thong. The bushy black pubic hair poking out on all sides wasn't what you'd see in a girly mag, but the audience whooped and whistled enthusiastically. Now it had to be my turn to lose, but I couldn't make it too obvious. Luckily, Sister Mary Sebastian was taking it personally. I dialed it back just a little bit, passing up a couple of opportunities, and the round went against me without having to take any heavy hits. I made the required face of dismay and frustration and dropped my shorts, revealing a pair of black satin panties that had just enough material in back that they didn't qualify as a thong. By this time, I was covered in sweat, and my reflexes were slowing. Each round became 2 minutes of ordeal. The pretense of competition slipped away, as did the humiliation of our predicament. I lost my bra, then Sister Mary Sebastian had to take off hers, and we were fighting in nothing but our knickers. Bottles appeared in the crowd, passed to them surreptitiously by Sister John. Rackham was too distracted by our show to notice. The plan was working, but it needed more time. There would only be 1 or 2 rounds more before the fight was over, and the alcohol hadn't taken full effect yet. But Sister Mary Sebastian had it together enough to figure out how to keep it rolling. When I lost the next round and had to strip off the last of my clothes, the other nun stepped in close. Loud enough to be heard over the jeering soldiers, she said, "Well fought, sister." She offered first her hand, then a warm embrace. "If you're up for it, we can keep performing," she whispered. Everything was on the line. If these men weren't stopped, they would take everything. They would take the fuel, the equipment, and the food. I had already watched in mute horror as they drove the convent's tractor into the shop to strip it for parts. There was no way our community would survive. When winter came, we would starve. Either that, or we would be forced to take a long hike through the wilderness, and most likely fall victim to bandits. The 60 miles to Paulson's Hope was a quick jaunt on a vehicle, but on foot it would be a death march. And with the Mother Superior and the rest of the convent held in the chapel under guard, it was up to the 3 of us. There was a fire in my heart, a rage like nothing I had felt since joining the convent 3 years ago, and that kindled my other passions as well. A frustrating day keeping the cantankerous tractor working often ended in Sister Mary Sebastian's bed, getting my fill of the woman's nimble fingers and tongue. In spite of doing our best to be quiet, the rest of the convent was aware of the nature of our relationship. I knew it because some of the other beds produced the same sounds from time to time. So the idea of having an audience wasn't new, though the intoxicated masculine nature of this audience was. They weren't understanding sisters, peers with many of the same needs and desires. But despite all that, I was ready to put on a show. I pulled Sister Mary Sebastian into an embrace, kissing her deeply as the crowd roared its approval. In response, my partner grabbed my breast, pinching the nipple and shaking it. I gasped, mostly in earnest, but playing it up for the crowd. They loved it. I knelt before my lover, gripping her butt and pressing my face into her crotch. This wasn't part of our usual lovemaking, but it made a great show, especially when Sister Mary Sebastian moaned as if it was. The crowd got louder, and Captain Rackham began to shout, "Get back in your seats, you goddamn reprobates!" The rattle of the fence in its frame drew our attention. One of the soldiers had lurched to his feet and staggered into the barrier, causing it to sag inwards. "Come here, baby. Let me show you." As the fence collapsed inward, Sister Mary Sebastian delivered a vicious stomp, bouncing the intruder's head off of the hard-packed dirt floor. More of the men rose to their feet, voices raised but not quite shouting, stumbling and tripping rather than lunging. Some of them collapsed, unable to even stay upright. Sister Mary Sebastian and I were tired and bruised, but there was only a moment to act while Rackham digested what he was seeing. The 2 of us threw off our gloves and clambered over the collapsed fence, attacking the only man who hadn't gotten any alcohol. He went down in an astonished pile, felled by a hammer blow to the side of his neck, an uppercut to the jaw, and an elbow to the back of his head. On the ground, a stomp in the middle of his back made sure he wouldn't get up. He curled up in a ball and let out a sound halfway between a moan and a growl. I took the sidearm from his hand, checked the clip, and nodded. Chapel. We didn't bother to get dressed. We raced from the barn, leaving the nearly unconscious soldiers behind. The men in the chapel hadn't been given the alcohol or the soup. They'd be at full alert. But the sisters under their guard would be alert as well. 22 women waiting for the signal. It came in the form of gunshots, fired into the air as I raced across the compound. 3, then 2. I reached the doors of the chapel just as the mayhem was beginning. The captive nuns threw off their cassocks and charged their guards, tackling them to the ground, tearing away their weapons. They pummeled them with fists and feet, reducing them to whimpering piles of meat within moments. A few hours later, the men of the 7th Armored Brigade, U.S. Army, were securely bound, kneeling under a starry sky. Most of them were still reeling from the effects of the chemicals in their systems, or from the punishment they received. Some were unconscious. Mother Ephraim stood on the steps of the chapel, wisps of gray hair escaping from her ponytail and blowing across her face. You are exiled from this place. You will be permitted to keep enough trucks to carry you, and given enough food and fuel to get you to Paulson's Hope, about 60 miles east of here. We're keeping your weapons. We're keeping all but your most essential tools. You can keep personal equipment like clothes, bedding, and medical gear.
What are we supposed to do when we get there?
Rackham growled.
Beg?
Paulson's Hope needs strong limbs and able bodies, Mother Ephraim replied. You will become members of a community rather than predators upon them. You're not the first group we have sent there. They'll understand your situation. The first group will leave immediately. When we get word that they've arrived, we'll send the second. You should all be there by morning.
What are you going to do with the tanks?
Rackham asked, a note of derision edging into his voice.
You don't know how to operate them. You don't know how to maintain them. We are U.S. military. It's our job to provide for the common defense.
Is the government back then? She asked, head cocked. When are the elections? When no answer came, Mother Ephraim strode up to the nearest of the machines, stroking its front armor with familiarity. The M34 Adaptive Combat Platform is not the most advanced tank ever built, but it's the one that survived the apocalypse. Its AGT 2000 fuel cell, independent 6-point electric drive, and simplified tread design allows survivability in situations with limited supplies and improvised spare parts. She turned back to Rackham. But you know that. You know that we understand how these machines work because your men stripped our tractor for parts. It had been an M34, and you know that. Before I took my vows, I was First Sergeant Kimberly Pleasant, 81st Armored Regiment. I not only know how to use this equipment and maintain it, I know how to teach. We'll take good care of your tanks, Captain, and we will indeed provide for the common defense, a duty to which you have been derelict for far too long. When the invaders were all sent off, Mother Ephraim found Sister Mary Sebastian, Sister John, and me. You've done the convent a great service. There's still a lot of work to do, but you 3 are excused. Go get some rest. We stumbled into the dormitory, stripped off our clothes, and dropped into our beds. Sister John was asleep within seconds. Sister Mary Sebastian wasn't. She looked over at me from under her woolen blanket and bit her lip. Sore? She asked. Yeah, you got me good a couple times. Kiss it better. I laughed, trying to keep it down so I didn't wake up Sister John. What? You know fighting gets me keyed up. I rolled onto my back, Me too. She crossed the space between our beds in record time, climbing under the covers with me on my tiny bed. I shifted to make room. It wasn't big enough for the two of us, but we knew how to make it work. We had our undies off in seconds, to press our bodies together with nothing at all between us. Thighs between thighs, hip bones pressed to mounds, we kissed deeply, thoroughly, hands roaming, caressing, pinching, squeezing, mouths kissing, licking, sucking, gasping, teeth gritting to hold in the forbidden cries. We moved slowly, lest the rustling sheets disturb the other sisters. We didn't need gags or ropes. Ordinarily, the room was full of sisters, but even with only one sleeper there, we needed to restrain ourselves. Or maybe we had grown so used to the restrictions we placed on ourselves that it had become a habit, just the way things were done. It didn't matter. It was a spice we had grown to crave. Sister Mary Sebastian returned to her bed, and we slept.
You have been listening to Nobilis Reed presents AudioThrust. AudioThrust is created and written by Nobilis Reed. Narration is by Vivienne Ferrari. Audio editing and music is by Peter Elfman. Words are copyright 2025 Nobilis Reed. Audio production copyright 2025 Nobilis Reed, Vivienne Ferrari, and Peter Elfman.